Just waiting for the audience to start coming on. Okay, I'm starting to see people. Hello, Peter. Hi, guys. Starting to see signs of life. Welcome, welcome, Rachel, Jamie. Thank you for showing up, Sean. Hi, Lena. So I wanted to come online because I haven't seen you guys in a while, or I guess you haven't really seen me in a while. We've been posting a lot, but not really seeing each other a lot. And I wanted to address something that is oftentimes, whether we're consciously aware of the term ascension or just consciously aware that there's something going on in the greater scheme of things that can be kind of validated through observation, mass observation, we're kind of aware that there's something quite significant about recent experiences, both personally and collectively, and maybe some answers to any questions that you guys might have could be provided for through this conversation tonight. And I do want to leave open for any sort of discussion on this subject or questions on this subject. And I know that this topic can be sometimes very controversial, as we have a lot of beautiful thinkers in this world that are very much more scientifically minded and earthy in their approach to understanding all of life and their experience of it. And so this is an open discussion forum for anybody that would like to contribute other views of understanding experiences, and also for everyone to evolve together in a greater understanding because of a shared platform like this that we can all discuss these things on. And so as I'm sharing what I'm going to be sharing tonight, please be under the awareness that I am only simply sharing what feels true to me, and I know as what feels right for me to be understanding my experience through. And I'm not claiming this to be anybody else's need-be truth, but perhaps through sharing of a perspective, others can say they resonate with it or don't resonate with it, and they can either take from it what might be helpful in terms of their own experience, or just realize that it didn't seem helpful and that's not for you then. And so this is all about individual cultivation, conscious cultivation, and individual evolution. So I just want to make sure. I don't know if this music that I have on in the background is interrupting anybody's ability to hear me. So if you're having an issue hearing me, please just let me know. So otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And many of us have heard the term ascension being thrown around a lot by certain New Age thought processes. And there's a lot of people getting behind the conscious movements, so to speak. And then we begin to understand that there's a thought of us all kind of ascending into something. And we're like, what the heck is that? It can be very ambiguous until you start to really explore it beyond just conversations, random conversations. But essentially, it is largely, I think, misunderstood experience if you don't dive into trying to figure it out a little more. A lot of times people will say that ascension, simply because of our third dimensional experience of it, or until now third dimensional experience of it, us trying to put it into understandable human limited boxes of awareness, we're saying that ascension essentially means that we're going up somehow, right? That it is a experience that is an elevation of sorts, and to my understanding, it's more, I feel, better expressed as an expansion of sorts rather than an elevation. And it's essentially us beings inside of this corporeal form, expanding our awareness, and in that awareness expansion, expanding our energetic frequency out beyond what we've already been resonating at. And so as we are kind of going out more fully in our experience and understanding of ourselves, there is, as we're moving out of our awareness, and we're expanding out and panning out in our awareness, we are moving into finer frequencies of understanding and of dimension and experience, which every dimension has its own platform of frequencies that it works on, and every single dimension, as we're expanding out in dimensional experience, is basically like a blueprint of how our consciousness will be experiencing itself at the moment as well. And so to me, it's not really about going up or down. It's more about like a breath going in or out of our super consciousness, experiencing itself as an individual at this time. And so I want to just start by sharing at this moment that most of you know about me, or some of you don't know, that I am a Christian in background. I'm a Protestant Christian in background, and so I come from a background of understanding spirituality. I was born into a spiritual experience of Christianity and understanding Jesus and salvation of one soul through the Christ Jesus approach of He being our Savior. And so as I began to notice and become courageous enough with myself to start really listening intuitively to myself rather than what I had been taught my entire life, which didn't always feel right. A lot of it did feel right, but there was also a lot of growing up as a Protestant Christian that didn't quite leave me feeling satisfied with answers to my own wonderings and other people's wonderings that I came into contact with. And so approaching adulthood, mid-20s, I began to realize that there was a large part of my depressive cycles with myself that were because I didn't feel lined up correctly spiritually. And so when I hit my mid-20s, which was right around 2010, 2011, 2012, which then, as we were kind of aware of certain happenings in those years, we began to realize that I, in my mid-20s, was kind of just along with a huge, massive soul group that was experiencing very similar situations in 2012-ish as well, kind of feeling this lost or ambiguous feeling of there's something more, and I'm not quite sure yet what it is based on what I've experienced and been taught up until now, but I feel there's something more, even whatever it might be, let me go ahead and figure it out. And so a lot of us started searching because there was stuff going on inside of us, questions being risen inside of us right around 2012. And in a moment here, I'll talk a little bit about the perhaps significance of 2012. And so we started searching, and myself, I started to just kind of go in the direction of my curiosities. And I've always had the ability to see aura light around people, energy around people, and I felt that somehow there was a connection to that experience of my own personal experience of seeing energy that was somewhat aligned with what felt truer to me than what I had been brought up with in Protestant Christianity. And so I went in the direction of my psychic site, of energy site, and that very gradually and immediately led me into a New Age thought and a definite metaphysical experience beyond what I had been exposed to until then. And Reiki was the first thing that came into my life to expand me on further than what I had been taught until that time, energetically and spiritually. And it was just a natural progression of things being magnetized into my life, people being magnetized into my life, books, healing modalities, lots and lots of online material, that I began to filter through my own truth barometer of what felt right rather than what was told to me was right. And so there was a lot of different things that I was coming into contact with at that time of my life, 4 or 5 years ago, that I was very impressionable about, but also just filtering everything through what felt right and didn't feel right. And so this is how we all do this in life, whether we're atheist or one of the most strict religious people we could be. We're always filtering what feels right to us through our own experience. And that's what we're experiencing as truth. And as we evolve as humans, this process just naturally evolves as well. And so what I have come to understand, and the specifics of all of this may be, open for discussion and also subjective understanding. And so I'm going to try to eliminate so much of the potential fantasy of this in terms of timelines and historical projected experiences. And like, for instance, we could talk about Atlantis, but that's something that we can only right now at this point hypothesize on, because it's not something that, as we are at this point in time in this experience, that we can validate through physical tangible evidence. And so I'm going to eliminate a lot of that, and I'm going to just kind of try to talk about what we can validate for ourselves in this lifetime together, and speak on like dates and times that we're all experiencing and things that we can reference ourselves, and then talk about how I understand that to be. And so we can all kind of realize, if we look back in our memories and experiences over the last couple years, that 2012 was a pretty significant year for a lot of us. And a lot of things were in the process of transitioning into a different form, like relationships and career and locations, and a lot of us with our health were being challenged at that time as well. But there was like a large shakeup around 2012 where people said that a lot of us felt like we had been activated by something, like there was something really pressing inside of us that was seeking to be acknowledged, right? And so we made some pretty drastic choices and transitions around 2012 to start validating whatever that weird ambiguous pool was inside. And so if we begin to observe nature that we can on this planet, whether it be going out into the forest or the ocean, or just watching things evolve over time and cycles, we begin to see that we humans are simply a smaller part of a greater whole experience. And then we can look at things like in microscopic form and see that even on a microscopic level, what we can validate through sight and scientific measurements, the cells in our body, for instance, and our DNA begins to exhibit a lot of similarities to how our life revolves and then how we see the planets revolving. And we begin to see that we are what we call just a fractal expression of a greater truth, of a greater all-encompassing experience. And we are actually able to validate that the physical planet that we are living on is very, very similar to our own physical experience as living beings with an aura and a cymatic frequency, sound frequency of our own. And so we begin to see that we are just a smaller part of a greater being, physical being that is scientifically validatable, is I guess the word I'm looking for, about our planet that we're on has the resonance and the cymatic sound makeup of our bodies exactly, our physical bodies exactly. So basically our physical form with our aura and our cymatic sound frequency that we're resonating at as soul beings inside of a physical body, the planet Earth that we're living on has exactly that same thing going on. It's just she's seen and experienced as a round planet rather than a humanoid figure with arms and legs and a body. And so we begin to see that if you look up the term consciousness and conscious being, and it begins to be seen that our Earth actually is also a conscious being. And then if you study the planets around us and their frequency makeup, you begin to also see that they are conscious beings through their cymatic frequencies and awareness as well. And so we are all just doing the same thing, whether that be at a microscopic level of our own physical body or us being like a cellular microscopic expression of a larger planetary body of Earth. We're all doing, and then our the solar system that we're on and in is basically also can be confirmed as a smaller portion of a very similar expanded whole beyond this solar system and the universes and all of these things that science can confirm. So we begin to see that this is either something that we can experience and understand through the term spirituality, or we can also begin to see that this can be scientifically studied and measured as well. And so when I was in 2012 time with myself, even though I had been raised spiritually, I began to see that I was unfortunately a huge skeptic and doubter of all of this type of what I called woo-woo metaphysics back then. Even though I was studying Reiki, I was really finding it challenging to just immediately start trusting all of that was going on. It's like I needed scientific evidence somehow, or some sort of like concrete measurement with myself to be shown to me to start being able to trust this process of this spiritual expression of my evolution. And so then I began to see and read certain quantum physics that could validate things, but then also there were experiments that were given to me, energy experiments to start seeing physical, tangible results as well. So when I want to approach talking about something like Ascension, it's hard for me to figure out, do I want to do this scientifically or spiritually? And I just want to say that they're both pretty much the same thing, that science is provable by spirituality, and spirituality is provable by science if we do enough compare and contrast. And so there is a great understanding when we want to talk about truth. We want to talk about where we start seeing similarities in repetitive story similarities or repetitive patterns in things. When we can start seeing repetition across the board somehow, we begin to see that whether that individual expression of that repetitive cycle is actually the full truth or not, it at least is pointing back to a truth that seems to be understood on a whole level. And so when I start seeing or saying things that are kind of ascension related in spiritual terms, I can start saying that we look at all of the great religions in general and we start to see a seed of similarities between them rather than the differences in telling that seed of truth and expressing the details of that seed of truth. But we want to talk about how there seems to be some sort of great separation that seems to be being told on a larger level throughout the ancient wisdoms, or we also have something of a repetitive theme of salvation being played out as well. And this can even be taken outside of religion, but can be then relegated to the background of mythology, and how the myths of ancient times seem to also start reflecting the same truth of some sort of fall of whatever godlike being is being talked about at the time in any myth, or a hero of any myth having to transcend his mere humanness into a godlike creature of full embodied self-empowerment. And so we can see this theme playing out all across the board in different avenues, that there is some aspect of a fall from grace, a fall from awareness, a fall from some sort of super conscious expression of oneself, to mere struggling to get back up to this type of awareness of oneself again. And then in the end, when that individual, or essentially the individual becomes fully aware of itself again, they transcend into some sort of immortal expression, right? Immortal in the way that we remember them, or the way that we tell about them. And so we can see similarities like that when we're looking for truth. And so we begin to see that somehow all things seem to be pointing back to a very personal experience of fall and redemption. And so in my understanding, and what I have come into contact with different forms of thought over the past couple years, but also being taken from my history as a Protestant Christian for most of my life, leading up until the last couple years, what I'm about to say feels right for me. And this is just simply evolving all the time as well, as I come into greater expanded thought process with people and other cultures and other belief systems. So I'm always taking what feels right and feeling what doesn't feel right, and just honoring myself in this process. And so it is thought that in 2012, astrology, there was a lot of astrological stuff going on in alignments, and this is getting too bright for me over here. There was a lot of astrological happenings and stirrings that were kind of using the frequencies of their planets, conjoining with other planets and different star frequencies, that was energetically, as we're all connected and we're seeing that we're just larger and smaller parts of the same thing, we were all being affected by the planetary happenings around us. And if you want to think about energy and everything as energy, as we can talk about God, whether this be spiritually or energetically, scientifically, we begin to realize that they're kind of talking about the same thing. And so as I move forward, I'm going to be saying one thing maybe, but it's also meaning the other thing at the same time. Just depends on how you look at it. So as we talk about God, we begin to see that if we're talking about God religiously, we say, what is God? God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-creative, both big and small at one time. It can be either the still small voice of nothingness inside of your heart, or the largest, most destructive and creative, awesome power in all of existence. So that's God in spiritual terms. Or we have in scientific terms, they like to scientifically formulate our experience as nothing but energy, right? And so when you're talking about all-pervasive life expression and experience scientifically, we begin to see that energy is essentially the same thing as God. We are saying that energy is all-powerful, all-invasive, everywhere. The act of creation is an energetic expression. It is, and then also it can be either nothing or everything all at once, small or large. So we're the same thing going on here. It's the same thing. And so sorry guys, you're going to hear a train probably every once in a while throughout this. It is so annoying, especially at 3 a.m. Oh yeah, Matt's over here. For anybody that doesn't know that yet, that's who that weird voice is. So going to the process of understanding our place in this experience with all of these planets around us. understanding that these planets around us are also conscious beings as well. These stars, and what actually happens to a conscious being as it is evolving through perhaps a small state into an evolved state of maybe into a human, and then also into what we want to understand is maybe a planet after human ascension, and then essentially the planet into a solar expression of itself as a star, and then that star evolving itself into an explosion of new creations. And it's a very evolving process of expansion of consciousness that takes different forms in different experiences of dimensions and reality. And so as we are 2012 astrologically being influenced by the energies around us, we are beginning to realize that there is a significance with the planets, right? And that we begin to realize that there's a lot of transitions going on in our lives. And we begin to realize and be able to validate on mass levels that we're beginning to have finer experiences with spirit. Like a lot of people experiencing seeing things that aren't really there, right? Or hearing things that aren't really there. Or feeling things, random things that are kind of freaky if you don't really know what you're dealing with. So we're all experiencing shifts. We all are experiencing an expanded aspect of awareness with things that are maybe not of this physical plane. And we are also beginning to experience something of like a breakdown effect. And that often feels like like a challenging aspect to go through with ourselves, like relationship breakdowns or shifts in career and all these sorts of difficult decisions that sometimes need to be made. Oftentimes our evolutionary process is mirrored to us through interpersonal relationships, and that's how we evolve with ourselves, by seeing ourselves in the form of another or through the eyes of another, or because we begin to see that the way that the world is experienced by us is very much a personal situation, and that what our truth is might be not the other person's truth. And so it becomes very personal. And ascension, the process of ascension, is nothing more than the act, the literal act of when you consciously decide on some level that you are wanting to be in a better state of experiencing than what you're experiencing now. That's it. That's simple. And then as soon as you consciously make that choice to evolve yourself or better your experience, it's too late. There's no turning back. The process of your own personal ascension has already begun. Once you make the connection within yourself that something's missing, you don't quite exactly know yet what it is, but you're willing to start finding out, no matter how long it takes, because some people it takes longer, and some people it takes very short periods of time to fully recognize what that is that they're missing, so to speak. Missing, we're actually just remembering that they had all along. So as soon as you start saying to yourself, there's something more, I'm going to find it, don't know how, but it's going to happen, that's your ticket to ascension. And regardless of whether you go back on that or not is a different story. You're not going to be able to stop the process, because everything from that moment on, when you've made that connection within yourself that there is something greater, you're connecting to that truth within yourself. That's what you're calling into your experience. And so many of us in 2012 began to have that internal connection because of some planetary stuff that was also instigating that as well. And so many of us in 2012 started our evolutionary process, a lot of us without knowing it and realizing it. And then we can see ever since then how we've become greater spiritually aligned with different things, or we begin to see how our life, whether it be experienced through scientific viewpoints or spiritual viewpoints, our life is beginning to take shape in different ways that is more conducive to what's true for us, rather than what has been true for the world around us, telling us what was true for us. And so many of us have been also influencing. As you study energy, you begin to see that what any part of an energetic whole is going through at any time is affecting the rest of the whole. That you can't do one thing to one isolated system or individual without it also affecting everything else. So once all of us in 2012, that are probably all of us here on this live feed together, many of us made that inner connection. And then we began to search. And in our process of searching, we have been affecting the environment around us, and also holding and embodying that frequency of evolved consciousness than where we were a couple years and months beforehand. And so as we are energetically the frequency rising within ourselves, we are affecting this process for everybody else, and it's just having an exponential effect to have more people making that inner connection and starting to search and evolve themselves. And so it has been scientifically proven that our DNA strands are, I think they tried to term it junk DNA, but as we begin to examine the human DNA strand, we begin to see that there is a lot of stuff in our DNA that is somehow not being used, and that we're only using and accessing at our daily experience of being a human, only a small, very small part of that DNA inside of us. And so we then begin to wonder and question what the heck is in the rest of our DNA that is just kind of sitting there stagnant. And then as you begin to evolve your own experience, whether it be scientifically or spiritually, and you begin to become happier and happier with yourself, you begin to see that your capacity to be, I guess, a good conscious influencer of your environment begins to be really apparent to you, because you begin to see that thoughts then begin to really start showing themselves physically, and somehow you're manifesting things into physical reality, right, just by your thoughts or your wishes. And this is all just evidence of how we're beginning to access more of our DNA, what they call junk DNA, and what's encoded inside of us. And as we begin to wonder what that junk DNA is, and our experiences start to just evolve within itself, or expand upon itself, we begin to see that more of those DNA hidden aspects are being lit up and now being confirmed as usable. And so we see that there's actually processes that are going on in our own thoughts and energy fields that are actually activating parts of that junk, once thought of as junk DNA, something that was useless, is now beginning to be like, oh my goodness, what is going on? When we start seeing more and more experiences, there's more and more DNA coming to life. What happens if we continue to experience and expand upon this experience, and then we see more and more of this DNA lighting up? And so we see that there's growth going on physically, and there's growth going on in our lack of physical experience. So our awareness of super conscious, super physical experiences is growing at the same time as our physical bodies are evolving as well. I don't know if anybody else can confirm this, but I have a feeling that you probably could, that I know that my physical looks since 2012 have naturally changed, and I'm not one of those people that's constantly going to the gym and working on myself, and I've not had any plastic surgery. I've not done anything other than just wake up every day and kind of try to live as healthy as I possibly could. But my physical looks have changed, and it's been very, very interesting. It's not just a process of getting older. There's different things that have changed about my aura, the way that my physical skin glows in different ways. And so I think that some people can also validate that their physical looks have changed in this process as well. And because this is very down to the core genetic makeup of what we're physically expressing. And so that is validatable. And I'm sorry, there's like so many different ways I could go with talking about this process. But I want to talk about how it is understood that us being super conscious beings have somehow mimicked and very much been a full expression of what we talked about earlier, the fall from grace, the fall from super awareness of oneself into a muted state, or what we call a fallen state, or some call it sin. But really what sin is, in my understanding, is missing the mark of full awareness of one's God self. And so as we begin to see, whether it be expressed scientifically or spiritually, I'm going to go with the spiritual concept of this right now, just because it feels more beautiful for me to express it this way. But we understand that in the Bible it talks about God making man and woman in the likeness of himself. And so we begin to see what does that mean. And as we read through scripture in the Bible, we begin to see that Jesus himself talks about him being the way, the truth, and the life. But then he also talks about all of us here being gods. In John, the book of John, he talks about us being God. And so then you begin to see that there's some truth of some sort of experience of us being created in an image of Almighty Creator. What does that mean if we are just descendants or simple expressions of that Almighty Creator? What does that mean for us? That means that we are what that Creator is. And so what did we discuss God was, whether we were talking about it spiritually or scientifically earlier? What did we mention? We mentioned it being a all-powerful, all-creative, all-pervasive, all-knowing, everything that you could fathom is God. And so if we're created in its likeness, what does that mean for us? That we are somehow mirrors of exactly that. That there is no lack of potential to be embodied in, there's no lacking in our ability to embody all of that as simple descendants of that. And so that's what this process essentially is, as we have come in through our evolutionary process of this journey back to ourselves, our source, our state of all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, all-permeating expression of ourselves. And we then run into the energetic, cymatic makeup of something called the dimensions. And those dimensions are hypothesized to be how many there are. There's a different is based on subjection here. So I'm going to say generally there's about 10 to 12 understood dimensions, experience of dimension, and the consciousness that has kind of come down from source from itself is having to experience all of these dimensions back to itself, with source point being understood to kind of be around the 12th or above of dimensions. And so as we go down like to level 1, 2, and 3, we begin to see that there's a very dense aspect to the cymatic frequency of these dimensions, which allows for consciousness to only embody itself with very rigid terms to live by and rules to live by. And in our third and fourth experience right now of these conscious expressions of dimensions, we are beginning to see that, okay, there is a physical world to this experience of my journey back to myself. There is a physical attachment to this physical world, and I can validate my experience and my identity through the things around me that I can feel and touch and smell. But then there's an awareness of something greater beyond this physical touch and tactile experience. And we're talking then about fourth dimensional awareness, right? And so we are seeing and embodying right now on a large level third and fourth dimensional awareness as a human collective. And so when we are talking about something called the ego, it is this energetic being, so to speak, that has been allotted by our superconsciousness to evolve through. To evolve, our superconsciousness evolves itself through the vehicle of the ego. And so the ego is everything that is, I guess the best way to put it, the antithesis of the all-knowing. And we can, through third dimensional confirmation and our experiences here in third dimensional beings and, well, expressions of our beingness, we can see that there's something called duality that has been structured into our experience to help us be aware, more aware of ourselves and our experiences here. And so that is like the contrast effect of day and night, or the opposite effect, to help us to understand one experience versus another experience, which they're both true, right? Night is just as real and valid as daytime, right? So light is just as valid and important as nighttime. And we begin to see that there's all of these contrasts everywhere in life as we look. And so we begin to understand that there is a truth beyond what our physical experience can provide us, that somehow this physical experience must be structured upon. And so when we're talking about all of ourselves growing back into our superconsciousness, we begin to see that this ego, this separation of that awareness, is very, very important for us to go through and experience in order to become more aware of our truth of expanded awareness. So right now, our ego, our individual experience of the whole of creation, which we all are, all of our personalities here on Facebook together and running through our daily lives, are all very personal, individualized, customized experiences of a super conscious entity, super evolved entity, learning about itself through various billions and millions of ways, but all unique, but all just as important and informative and needed for the whole expression to be complete of this being that we all are. And there's different hypotheses of what we all are. So I'm going to kind of like leave that out and just talk about what we can all validate through sentience and understanding this physical experience that we're talking about right now. And so basically, in my understanding, we are all needed to be experiencing our lives personally in order to give information back to the super whole, the super conscious whole. And so everybody's experience is just as important as the other person's. And right now in third and fourth dimension, we are learning to detach our awareness to the solid state that third dimension is experienced as. Because if you can at least fathom something that is beyond what you can see and feel, even if it's just outer space. All of us are kind of just sitting in our living rooms right now, right? Or some form of here on this plane, and not really out in outer space. Most of us are basically trusting that the stories that we're told and the pictures that we see of even outer space are real, and not just something being fed to us by an agenda somewhere, right? We're somehow able, if we can put like a picture to it, we're able to better put some sort of validity to it. That's still in our human finite understanding, fear-based way of saying this is true and this is not true, because we're not ready to fully yet somehow say that everything I know is true, and that it doesn't matter what is given to us to be understood as true, what we feel is true. And when we begin to just kind of say, yes, what I feel is true, regardless of who can validate it or not, or what pictures can validate it or not, you're starting to self-accept and starting to love. And then you see that your experience is starting to expand upon itself. Okay, I have to bring myself back in because I'm getting off of track. But so basically we are saying that there is more than just right now at third and fourth dimension. We are saying there is more than what I can kind of see, and more than what I can touch. And what that is still yet to be proven by my awareness, but there's more. And so as we begin to go on into different states of awareness, we are seeing that possibilities start to open up all over the place as well. And that has to do with us being more aware that our frequency is simply creating our experience. And if our perspectives are shifting with our frequencies and what we know and understand as possible, we are then able to open ourselves into more possibilities to become our experience, because we're saying I'm allowing for there to be a greater truth than what it is that I'm experiencing now. And so then that allows you to access more power. And so we can see that this evolutionary process is also just an important part of healing. And I've often questioned, as I've been going through this process of my own personal evolution, is if this is really nothing more than just becoming more self-empowered and more self-aware, essentially, then isn't this all just one big healing journey? There's really nothing to be seen other than it's like us healing ourselves, whether that be through us understanding that there was some wounds in our past in childhood that are now being healed, or we begin to see that those like fractal wounds of childhood are somehow just a soul expression of a greater trauma that happened when we were falling from somewhere that was anything less than, or from our greater personal state, our original state, of unconditional love and bliss. And so all of this process of ascension is this healing journey of perception. And as you begin to heal your own, a lot of us tackle this experience at a very, very small level of looking at it in terms of interactions between people or your interactions with your daily life, and allowing yourself to embrace the challenges of all that means to be doing right now, as we're kind of detaching our ego personality to the attachment that we've had to this way of physical life. As we begin to evolve past their attachments to our experiences here, we begin to see that we're definitely having to let go, and sometimes painfully. Sometimes the let go in the evolutionary process is not a pleasant experience to go through. But it's when we begin to allow it to be what it is, which is working always for our greater awareness, we begin to experience it with greater ease. And I'm being drawn to pull back to 2012 for some reason, that there was a conscious, it is thought to believe that there was a conscious choice made by the planet, the sentient being that our planet is Gaia is, that her consciousness said, okay, I'm ready to go higher, I'm ready to evolve now. And that all of us being part of that process, because we're simply on her, we're forced into it. But there's also thoughts that she started to evolve and do this ascension process of her own in 1989, and that since 1989 into 2012, it took her that long as a sentient being to start embodying fifth dimensional frequencies within herself, and that in 2012, that was when everybody on her started to have to be forced into fifth dimensional frequency themselves. And so that's why it feels like a lot of us are kind of on a roller coaster ride, because the Schumann frequency of this planet is resonating at something much higher than what all of us were at the moment. And so we, because we are literally inhabiting her, are having to match the energetics of her, whether we like it or not. And that is frequency shifts all over the place in as we're trying to match our mother, so to speak, our host. And so that's when we start having like planetary shifts and breakdowns in the world, whether that be politically, interpersonally, structures, around the world, like earthquakes and all sorts of crazy happenings. Like that's the equivalent of our sentient being going through her own healing process and her own healing crisis and her own evolution. And so we begin to see that we're just like fractal expressions of her as our own life is going through our own earthquakes. And this has just been a lot of rambling about the process of ascension. And so if anybody wants to start adding questions now, I'm actually paying attention to the feed that I can actually start doing that and fielding any questions that anybody might have, because this has been a lot of talking. And it's been like a round table if anybody wants to say anything. But basically know that all of us, if we want to talk about something called Christ consciousness, this is also, a lot of us have been hearing the term Christ consciousness thrown out a lot in the metaphysical fields. And what that essentially means is what Christ is believed to have been is a fully embodied expression of God self. And that is meaning that he was a human, a spirit just like all of us are, a conscious being just like all of us are, in physical form just like all of us are, but without the fear blocking him of understanding how powerful and how connected and how all loving, how creative, how everything he was as God. He didn't have any of those fear blocks within him that most of us are having to evolve past. And so we are what he is, what we call then something called ascended master. That means he's mastered the experience of this physical plane, and understanding that there is no fear, that there are no limitations to experiencing life as a human, and that God is God whether he be in first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or beyond dimension. And to experience the omnipotence of who and what God is, all it is needed is to embody a lack of fear. And so when we talk about Christ consciousness right now in this ascension process, we are essentially saying that it's not that we are saying that Christ is who we have to say is responsible for our salvation. We're saying that it is being in the awareness of what Christ understood about himself as a God being in human form, that we are embodying his conscious level, his consciousness level. So we say that to be fully embodied of our God self, we are embodying Christ consciousness. And so that's why we're hearing Christ consciousness thrown around a lot right now as well, because that's where we're headed. And that is fifth dimensional awareness. Fifth dimensional awareness, which is apparently what Gaia is resonating at, with or without us, currently being on board with that. So fifth dimensional awareness and experience is a literal experience and awareness of unconditional love and oneness. And it's because when you begin to see just how we all are connected and how it is all connected, you begin to really love all of it. Because if you don't, then you're essentially saying, I don't love myself. Because we begin to see ourselves reflected in everything and everywhere. And that is what Jesus was embodying, was fifth dimensional awareness and beyond. So we are all headed there as well. So we are all becoming like Christ in this experience as well. And so it's my encouragement to you to understand that the breakdowns that you might be experiencing on a regular level. Hi, Terry. The breakdowns are all being designed for you to allow them to happen, because since specifically 2012, we've been being forced to be in higher states of happiness, whether we like it or not. And anything that is going on in our lives is working for that end result. And so whether that be a pleasant experience to transition through or a negative experience to transition through is really up to us and how much we want to hold on to the fear of becoming powerful like we're meant to be, and godlike like we are already. And so I'm trying to just think of anything else that I might not have touched on. This was very disjointed, but that's a lot of times how my mind works. It's just kind of like everywhere all at once. So there's probably a lot of just having to flip through different parts of this to even begin to understand this whole process that I was talking about. But if anybody has questions right now, I am open to answering them. I'm just going to stay on for a few more moments, trying to see if I need to be saying anything else. Just sitting with my own thoughts and listening as well. Bye, Julia Coyne. Good night. Okay. There's a lot of you on my news feed and friends list here that have a lot to add to this topic and things that I've discussed here. So please feel free to add stuff. And then we can maybe keep this discussion going. But I'm going to hop offline now because it doesn't look like anybody has any questions for me. Sorry if I confused you guys more than answered questions. But those are my thoughts. I would like to hear more about people's understanding of the DNA codes that are being activated right now. And that's pretty interesting to me to start seeing. One of the last things I will say about the DNA codes that are being activated within us right now is that when the dimensions, we're talking about the dimensions, and we're talking about third dimensional density, third density, we'll call it, third density, and how everything is understood to be real concrete, right, in third density. But then we begin to expand our awareness beyond third density into there's more, and then we begin to also see spirit realms more. Those are light, those are dimensions that are based more and held more in the light expression, like light frequencies of themselves, and lighter, finer frequencies. And so as we are expanding our frequencies into the fourth and fifth dimensions as our own bodies, we are having to obtain and match those light, finer light frequencies that we're moving into within our own selves. And so there is a lot of light that we are starting to emanate as our soul frequencies personally. And so our auras are getting brighter, our own frequencies are being able to be measured more with different scientific tools to validate that as well. And we are seeing that it's a very crystal-like physical expression of it. When we're looking at it from physical world, we're seeing it very much like crystals in what we're starting to embody. And like light prisms is what it's starting to become in our physical forms soon. And so eventually, as we all keep going into this evolved state, essentially we will have detached our awareness and our training wheel grip so much on this third state to where we actually let go of this third density state of physical understanding. And then that physical understanding just literally falls away. And we are now embodying together an awareness of pure energetics and light. And so in my understanding, that's where we're all eventually headed with ourselves, is full releasing and awareness of this physical form as we become all energy together. And okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to take Terry's Gotta Go along with my own. And I don't know how long this has been. It's probably close to an hour.
Exactly 1 hour.
Oh, exactly 1 hour, which is exactly how much I wanted to read, or not read, but speak for. So, goodbye, guys. Good night. Add any questions or comments. Please, more of my friends, add all sorts of stuff that you might want to. I love these types of conversations. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.